please?
No problem, Prof. Start it.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the REPS office, I would like to welcome you all to our student research seminar series. Today, we are pleased to welcome Mr. Al Salandy to his first PhD seminar. Mr. Al Salandy is a PhD student at UTT under supervision of Dr. Natalie Pissadi. I would like to invite Dr. Pissadi to introduce the student and the topic. Dr. Natalie, please.
Good afternoon. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Al. This is one of my most industrious students. He has a background in finance and HR, and it is in this latter area that his work revolves. And his work is gaining such traction that he's often asked to speak at conferences and meetings. So that's how important his work is. So without any further ado, because all the information is on the now pass you on to our person of the moment, Mr. Al Salandy.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Pissadi, and the members of the Postgrad office and team. I trust that you're seeing my presentation.
Yes.
And that the audio levels are in order. All right. So what I'm about to share with you is consider
Excuse me, before you
Yes?
start, it's not in presentation mode.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. It was up. You just needed to click from the beginning. Yeah. As
So
we
we
did
okay there
before.
now?
Ah, yes, perfect. Great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks so much. So what I'm about to share with you represents a snapshot in my research. Incidentally, this research started just about in 2019. The presentation outline for today covers a background of the study and some of the significance involved therein, cannabis culture. We will talk a little bit about control and prohibition throughout the years. And I tend to use disputes and grievances to help demonstrate advances in the law and how we have treated with it in the workplace. And then, of course, how the courts, the judicial system and the industrial court has treated with those grievances as they come forward. Towards the latter portion of the presentation, I'll talk a little bit about the recommendations coming from other jurisdictions and from our own court. And then I'll share with you my research questions. So we'll build some momentum as we get towards the research questions and then the conclusion. Study background. So like I started to mention, in 2019, I started the study right around the time the Dangerous Drugs Amendment Act was passed. That was December 2019. Until that time, my understanding of this cannabis, weed, we'll use different terms today, ganja, we know most of them. Until that time, my understanding of the subject matter would have been driven by my socialization, the people around me, the things that we pick up in the media and so forth. Cannabis users are likely to be members of our society in every profession, in every sector. Some of them may have been able to, as we say, become functional users. They're using, you're not really picking up that they're using. You may sense it sometimes they may disclose it to you, but generally speaking, they're everywhere to be found. And I've come to the realization, and even Professor Mahabir Wyatt, Dr. Mahabir Wyatt, or former Senator Mahabir Wyatt suggested in 2019 that employers should develop policies to address the issue, just as they have for alcohol and other drugs that might affect performance. I take this moment as well to mention the work of Dr. Li Po in 2023 out of UE, where a study was conducted and they determined that increased levels of cannabis exposure, that is the frequency of use, how much you use and how often you use it, is in fact related to psychotic disorder. And it's interesting that that research, in part, was done right here in Trinidad and Tobago. So we do have a present danger as far as use is concerned. No one is denying that. But there are aspects of the law that just don't necessarily gel with workplace policy at this time. And this is what I'm trying to address. More on the background and significance of this study. If you look towards the Sustainable Development Goals developed by the United Nations, and these SDGs were developed in 2015, and they represent a global agenda towards peace and prosperity and the health of the planet, you would find, interestingly enough, that 14 of these 17 strategic development goals have been tied to cannabis. What's even more interesting is that in 2018, our very own CARICOM Regional Commission on Marijuana endorsed these goals. And then right here at our national university, the university's current strategic plan speaks to our organization's role in support of national development and, of course, the Sustainable Development Goals. So this entire exercise, I would like to believe, is part of a larger agenda towards sustainable development and the health of our planet and the prosperity for all people. So let's get right into it. What is cannabis? According to the World Health Organization, cannabis is a herb, a herbaceous plant, as they say. It is usually found growing wild in temperate regions of the planet, but now with advances in technology and agri-science and so forth, you can grow cannabis anywhere. It's indoors, all about, not very much is needed. The World Health Organization refers to cannabis as monospecific, meaning Cannabis sativa lineus being the main plant, and there are several subspecies of the plant therein. Cannabis contains what we call metabolites called phytocarbanoids, and those phytocarbanoids could be distinguished or separated into the THC and the CBD groups. And the THC is what brings us the most concern as far as its tendency to cause what we call, it's an endorphic intoxicant. It causes that happy feeling, that buzz, some people say, a calm, mind-altering, all right? So when we talk cannabis herein, and I would like to drill down and to come down to the THC content, that percentage of THC in the cannabis, which is indeed a major factor for Trinidad and Tobago at this time. Very early in this study, I discovered that cannabis had a culture of its own, and cannabis culture, incidentally, that we have here now, has been found by previous researchers to come from India. You see, back in the early 1800s, a popular pastime in Delhi, India, was the use of cannabis, whether it be for religious purposes, for medicinal purposes, or just recreational. Cannabis was very part of that culture, very much part of that culture. And when indentured immigrants came to Trinidad following the end of slavery, they came here in 1845 with their Georgie bundles, or Jahaji bundles, as it ought to be pronounced. And included in those parcels were fruits, mangoes, sapodilla. They brought various types of plant life as well. And included in that was cannabis. And this was verified from the work of our recently departed Professor Samaru. And some of his work depicted there in the photo is what some of the persons who recently landed or back then looked like. So soon after we started this indentured labor force in Trinidad and Tobago and other parts of the Caribbean, like Guyana and Jamaica and so forth, something emerged that caused the authorities to have a closer look at conduct. And one of those commissions is called the Indian Immigrant Commission, 1885 to 1887. And they investigated these reports of misconducts. The commission was headed by one Sir Henry Bulwer. And they investigated, they interviewed persons. One of the persons they interviewed was one Captain Lucas. And even Captain Lucas testified that he presided over cases of assault which was fueled by the smoking of cannabis. So therein, in Trinidad and Tobago and in parts of the Caribbean and the British Empire, one could say that this is where concern was first raised about the role of cannabis and labor, that relationship, right? And it didn't lead to an automatic ban on cannabis, but it did raise concerns, some concerns to the point where there were restrictions. Those restrictions carried forward into other international forums like the Opium Commission, like you see on your screen, the Hague Convention in 1912, League of Nations. And one of the most significant interventions, I would call it, came about at the United Nations Single Convention for Narcotic Drugs in 1961, which considered a single instrument, that is, given that all countries in one way or the other had some sort of issue or was investigating the presence and the use and the effects of cannabis on labor, this single convention was the first major convention that actually led to the criminalization of the possession of cannabis use in this region and others. And this is a significant factor because between 1961 and the 1980s, what happened was and effectively the influence of other major players in the system on what led to drug-based policies and testing. So in a matter of speaking, the US government's international-led campaign on the illicit campaign, that campaign on illicit drugs and so forth, is what actually contributed to what we have in the workplace now as systems of testing and detecting. And it has really pretty much carried forward until the present day. So once again, from the 1980s to now, we have systems of drug testing, and by and large, it has cannabis and drugs in particular have been associated with employee absenteeism, workplace accidents, and theft and so forth. Much of this has been challenged in literature. That is to say that there hasn't been necessarily empirical evidence to prove the linkage, but all the same, the influence came, the policies came, and we still have them till today. Now, I'd like to take us forward into an area of the presentation that deals with the actual consequences of cannabis use. Because right now, we depend on the powers of observation. What you see, you may see somebody with a plant-like substance. You may smell what you believe to be cannabis. You may see them acting in a particular way. They may appear extra happy or drowsy, or you may redness of the eyes. We depend a lot right now on what we see or perceived until testing actually occurs. But you know what? When that testing actually occurs, be it through cause, be it that there's some accident at work and it leads to a workplace investigation, what we have thereafter are a number of traditional outcomes. Disqualification, right? You may actually be disqualified from a recruitment process. We still see ads where persons are invited to apply for certain jobs or training and apprenticeship programs, and you see listed there in the criteria that you must pass a marijuana and alcohol and drug tests. All right, so these are some of the interventions. Disciplinary action is another thing that can occur if your employer tests you or discovers that you are a cannabis user or you have cannabis in your system. Referral to employee assistance and or rehabilitation, and credit goes to the UWI, who already have a system in place, or have it in policy, that is, that they want to give those persons an opportunity to get help if you need help, if you have an addiction problem. There's loss of employment. Of course, if you're remanded in custody or convicted or sentenced to prison time, then one would expect that you're unable to fulfill your contractual duties and you're unable to report for work. So that also rules you out. There are a number of other consequences that have been connected with cannabis use. They include the embarrassment, the cost of tribunals and representation. And then persons have also complained about alienation and discrimination. So I like to use a couple of cases to help demonstrate now what has happened when this has been left to the policymakers and the persons who interpret the policy, meaning the judiciary and so forth. In Trinidad and Tobago, we have a mechanism under the Industrial Relations Act 8801, where matters of this nature can be referred to the court. After the correct steps, it can be referred to the court. And in this matter, this National Workers and Lifestyle Motors case, which started in 2019, it was actually, the judgment was actually delivered in December 2023 after the change in the legislation, which makes it perhaps one of the most recent and relevant cases I can bring to you. So in this case, the worker, who was a driver, was dismissed after failing a random drug test back in January 2018. He actually failed 2 tests within 3 days of each other. Both tests turned out positive for the use of cannabis. And in evidence and arguments, this is really interesting here. In evidence and arguments, the union argued that the law effectively decriminalized marijuana for personal use, and that the workers' use of the drug was now a private matter with no impact on the company. This is interesting because I believe many of us, or many persons in the workplace, might be led to raise the same arguments. Here's the law telling me one thing, and why are you trying to discipline me or to bring charges against me for the situation where you detect cannabis in the workplace, or my cannabis use in private? It's interesting to learn then that what the court had to say about this. And the court said that employers are obligated to ensure that employees are aware before they are implemented. They are aware of said policies before they are implemented. The court also referred to the legislation, which, funny enough, contains a section 5C of that Dangerous Drugs Act, that talks about persons being in charge of vehicles, being near schools, and so forth. So automatically, the worker was not just in contradiction of some perceived workplace policy. The court brought into question the fact that there was a law. This was actually part of the renewed law, the revised law, sorry, right? And as a consequence of all of this, the worker was actually, the dismissal was upheld by the court. And the court offered us a couple of lessons that come out of this. One of them being that we should ensure that he is not under the influence of the intoxicant to the extent that he is in such a state as to endanger his own safety. This is part of OSHA, all right? So the worker, like I said, the matter was dismissed. The court determined that the worker was in breach of the law as well as the employer workplace policy. And this stands as a very important reminder to persons who may venture in that direction. But to test this theory, I had to examine other jurisdictions where cannabis policy has been in place long before. One of those other cases comes from Massachusetts in the US. You see, in Massachusetts, medicinal cannabis has been available since 2012. Mind you, Trinidad and Tobago is still in the process of equipping various agencies and licensing authorities to treat with the question of rolling out medicinal cannabis, right? So here we go to Massachusetts law. And in this case, Babu 2 versus Advantage Sales and Marketing, the worker had a medicinal marijuana card. She got a job, right? She applied for a job, she was selected, and as part of the selection and rollout into, as part of her orientation, she was told, listen, you have to do a drug test. And she explained to the recruiting official, I have a medicinal marijuana card. It will show traces of cannabis in my system. She did the test, just like she said, it proved positive, and she was dismissed. Now, in assessing what took place here, this court, the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts, considered the facts, considered the person had a card, and actually ruled that she could sue the employer for discrimination. Interesting. It is possible that an employee will test positive for marijuana who has used it over some time, right? So this is another very important lesson that perhaps Trinidad and Tobago may benefit from, and certainly it is part and parcel of what the study entails. I take another example from an area where, which has been regarded as very forward-thinking. The Canadian system has been regarded as very forward-thinking because they've had cannabis laws, medicinal cannabis laws for a very, very long time. In fact, medicinal cannabis was available in Canada since 1999. And only in October 2018, the government enacted a Cannabis Act, which approved the commercial production and non-medicinal cannabis for persons, gummies and so forth. And in this case, Stewart versus Elk Valley Corporation, the court determined that an employer can require a worker in a safety-sensitive position to proactively self-disclose and use medicinally prescribed cannabis. This is something that is not yet present in Trinidad and Tobago. That is the habit or the feeling that you can disclose that to your employer. Because to what end, right? One may argue that okay, I disclose my cannabis use to the employer, and then what? Then I am discriminated against. Then they're out for me. Right? One could argue that. There are a couple of lessons that come out of the Canadian court, and I'd just like to share a couple of them with you. One is that cannabis in the workplace is no different than any potential or potentially impairing drug. The question is whether the worker is fit for duty. I've found in research that this fit for duty is repeating itself over and over and over again. And of course, persons are saying that the Canadians are rather progressive for including that. A second observation is that there is no duty to accommodate recreational cannabis users. Make no mistake there. There's no duty to accommodate. There is, however, a duty to accommodate a substance use disorder, such as addiction to cannabis or disability requiring authorized use of cannabis, until or up to the point where it causes hardship on the employer. And in those courts, or in that judicial system, the onus is really on the employer to demonstrate that by accommodating this cannabis, this medicinally or this medically prescribed cannabis user, I am causing hardship on myself, the employer. And then, of course, there's a duty to accommodate, but that accommodation must be balanced. It must not put others in danger. No, in other words, it must be that you seek to protect the rights of other workers to have a safe working environment. So through the passage of time, and I'm talking here between 2016 and now, there have been a couple of statements that tend to cause persons to sit back and consider what is the difference between our system now and what exists in other quarters. One of them comes from the the Society for Human Resource Management, who in 2016 said that the marijuana testing is not an accurate indicator of job performance or the likelihood of being involved in a workplace accident. Interesting, because the effects of the drug can vary between persons and may differ depending on the method of consumption and the potency. Another one comes from the Canadian Center for Occupational Health and Safety. And they said that the workplace drug testing is generally discriminatory. Remember that, generally discriminatory. We have not had much talk about that yet in Trinidad and Tobago, but the potential is there. That agency, the Canadian Center for OSHA, also suggests, they also advocate training for stakeholders, development of procedures for general consumption, and the concept of impairment. And substance testing should be reserved, once again, they're saying it's reserved for safety-sensitive positions. And then there's one more I want to share with you there. That comes from Chauvin Humphreys. These are scholars out of Stanford University, USA. They recommend that cannabis policy development should include limits on the potency of cannabis products as a mean of reducing possible harms of the drug, including addiction. This is quite similar to what local speakers like Marcus Ramkissoon who is known for assisting in the development of policy. Even Mr. Ramke soon has suggested that, look, in Trinidad and Tobago, now we have some issues determining what is the THC content from user or producer to producer. So you may have your 4 trees in your backyard, and those 4 trees may deliver a certain percentage of THC. But what about what you buy from the gentleman on the road, or you borrow from your friend, or you may find a source that is producing wine or gummies or all sorts of other cannabis related or cannabis infused products. It really is a clear and present danger to us developing now dependency and not knowing, or trying to even self-medicate and not knowing how bad it is. For that matter, we may be even taking on a dose of cannabis on a Sunday evening, thinking that, okay, we'll be okay to work tomorrow. And that cannabis dose may be the equivalent of strong liquor, as opposed to something mild that may help you relax if that is in fact what you're after. So all that I've just shared with you really leads to a couple of research questions. And I've laid them out on the screen there for you, but there's a little explanation I want to give, particularly to the first and last. What is the prevalence of cannabis used by white-collar workers in tertiary education? I've selected this sector because according to the ILO, tertiary education in Trinidad and Tobago employs some 15,000 persons. And those 15,000 persons really represent 6.5% of our population. It is a population that many of us on this particular Zoom seminar belong in, but it's also a sector that can be considered non-safety sensitive. Most of the jobs are sedentary, sitting behind a desk, intellectual jobs, teaching in the classroom, many of the jobs, not all. So I've selected this sector for further examination. But something interesting happens here. While we're asking what the prevalence is, we need to consider something that came during the COVID-19 lockdown. Vandenberg and others this would have been Belgium, realized that cannabis use did not increase during COVID-19 lockdowns in Belgium. I am not certain the same could be said for Trinidad and Tobago, particularly because we're coming from a period of change in legislation, the invitation or the openness to grow trees or to cultivate your own thing or to use cannabis on your own time, going straight into COVID lockdowns. Who is to say what the influence of that might have been on the individual? To what extent did the relaxation of legislation influence their decision to use cannabis? However, employers responded to the change in cannabis, and this speaks to the actual headline of the study. What have employers done, or are they planning on doing to address the issues of cannabis use by workers in their spare time? How are we educating workers? How are we providing for testing or employee assistance, or for those who choose to come forward and say, listen, I need some help, provide them in rehabilitation services? And what HRM policies can be recommended for management of white-collar workers following the relaxation of the laws? I would like to leave this study, or to conclude this study with some positives, and to actually provide some best practice based on what we've learned from other quarters. So as I conclude, I'd like to say that cannabis users are part of our workforce. They're everywhere. We don't know who they are. Like I mentioned earlier, they may be functional users. Some people even claim that they need a little smoke or a little cannabis to sleep, or to even function and work. Who knows? I'm not judging. I myself, I'm not a user. I do not advocate for, I'm not against persons using cannabis, but this is really the sum total of where we are heading as a society, and we need to examine it closer towards harm reduction. Hopefully in my seminar too, I would be able to provide you much more about the research methodology, the data, and the findings actually coming about from this study. Judicial precedents will also be a factor. it has become increasingly challenging to get the results of what the cannabis change in legislation has done to some of our Caribbean neighbors. But I'm going to continue to work on that. One industrial court judge mentioned to me this week that we don't write enough. And he's really talking about here in Trinidad and Tobago and other countries, we're not writing enough about our experiences on this particular matter. And His Honor, Mr. Rabatali actually cautioned that yes, the court looks at every case on its own merit, but a lot has to be said for the relationship between employer and employees, and communication is missing. We need to make sure that people are aware of the possibilities when they make that decision to use cannabis. And with that, I want to end my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention and hand over to the postgrad team. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Al, for this comprehensive presentation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, all audience and participants are invited and welcome to ask any question or to give any comments on the presentation. Ms. Jenny Lynn from PG office will handle this session. Jenny?
Thank you, Prof. Thank you all for that presentation.
Thank you.
Before we start, welcome Professor Imbe. Welcome Dr. Stephen Shepherd. It's good to have you all here on this forum. Looking forward to your comments as well and questions. So at the bottom of the toolbar, there's the raise hand option in reactions. You may go ahead, feel free to use it. And we will start taking your questions now. Whilst we wait for the audience, is there, Dr. Pasadi, would you like to ask any questions in the interim?
Oh, yes, I was just trying to figure out the raise hand gesture, but okay, thank you very much.
That's fine, it's within reactions, but that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so thank you very much, Al, for your presentation, as well as for your very clear statement on your own position on the topic. That was very, very quick and very, very loud. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that we're fellow staff at the UTT, and you have to be very, very clear about your own
I
position.
took off the HR hat a long time ago, earlier on this morning.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, I am very familiar with your work because we do talk about it a lot, but I do have one particular question I would like to ask.
Sure.
So, of course, in policy development of this kind, there'll be a number of factors that affect the way that it will be developed and how. So you mentioned something in your second to last slide, I think, about THC potency.
Yes.
So THC potency aside, the question I have is, even if you do determine a minimum level or a maximum level of THC potency that one can use, just as with alcohol consumption, the effect on the individual will vary for any number of reasons.
Yes.
Can you tell me how a policy can address that level of individual variance?
Right. I understand. Thank you. Thank you for that question. It's an interesting question. I've found that the policy must have the input of medicinal or medical practitioners. It's guided by what the medical practitioners say. I looked at a case in Canada where the worker was prescribed not more than 1.5 ounces of cannabis per day with the THC potency of not more than 22%. All right? So I suspect that in deliberating on the maximum content available to persons from medicinal cannabis, we can do it that way. But before all of that, the product has to be tested, right? The sources have to be, as we say, the sources have to be screened. There has to be comprehensive testing, and then those standards go in place. So that is my recommendation. The policies must follow what medicine has to say about the content. And I also believe that because, and I don't want to really, I'm going to use the term anyway, because cannabis use is in some of our DNAs, right? Or our ancestors used it. Who is to say that our ability to tolerate different strengths of cannabis isn't already worked into the system? Much like some people say that they can drink themselves to oblivion. I am not in a position to answer on that part of the biology part of it. I hope I answered your question.
All right. Well, I mean, yes, you did. I was just wondering, for example, if you take you and me, for example, we're very
Right.
different in size.
Yes.
And I was just wondering if we both take the same volume at the same potency, how the effects of it would manifest. I mean, very likely differently. And I was just wondering, in that regard,
Right.
yes, you can look at it from a medicinal point of view, a very clinical point of view, but I'm just wondering from that particular perspective, how the policy might be developed. But I know that's something that you'll get into more as you do more research.
Well, let me also say that another argument coming out of that Canadian case was that the worker tried she actually applied for a job that was safety sensitive. And the union argued that she should at least be allowed 24 hours to after use as a barrier to her being given access to that particular job or those job duties. But the court rejected that. 24 hours or not, it still remains the employer's right to refuse to put that person in a safety sensitive position because she may be a danger to other people.
All right, thanks. I'll allow the others to ask questions now.
I have a few comments here from Isha Honore. I hope I got that correct. I don't know if it's in response to your discussion, but I guess you may clarify. It will be the same process for any drug, and associated clinical guidelines. For use, any drug could have an individual response that varies, but there are broad guidelines and reports of drug adverse reactions, which all help to inform policy.
Yes.
Right. So,
Ms. Maraj, I don't know if you're hearing me.
yes, Professor Imbe, go ahead, go right ahead. I'm seeing you and hearing you.
Yeah, I'll put on my
Thank
camera
you.
too.
Thank you.
I didn't know if I had to put up my hand or what, so I
No,
just
that's
jumped in.
fine. That's fine. That's okay. I realize we're having a little issue with the reaction tab. That's okay.
And thanks, Al, for the invitation.
Thank you, Professor.
Let me give you a little incident that is personal. Not personal that I don't smoke or take gummies or anything, but I work as many of you know. I am chairman of a Panside bird sound. And in the Panyard, you meet all kinds of people. I also get involved in sort of social work in the community. So when I meet some of these guys who, I'm trying to guide them the right way, I try to get them into MIC. MIC has programs at various levels. At the lowest level, we have programs which cater for people just off the street, so to speak. One particular guy from up in a zone by me up there, they call, you know what they call zones.
Right.
I know the family and so on. And the mother tries her best. So I got him into MIC, but he had to do a drug test and he failed the test. So I told him, I said, listen, no, let me go back a little bit. I asked him, I said, by the way, you're going to have to take a drug test. Do you smoke? He said, yes, sir. I said, but you could tell me straight, I said, well, the program is started in the next 6 weeks. Could you stop smoking totally for the next 6 weeks? He said, yes, sir. So, and I believed him. He came 6 weeks after, did a drug test, marijuana's in the system. So I go on to him, I say, young man, I thought you tell me you stopped smoking for the last 6 weeks. He said, yes, sir. I checked a doctor who knows about these things. He says, listen, this thing stays in your system in some fatty part of your body for a long time. So somebody smoked 6 months ago, they might still have it in their system if they had been a sort of regular smoker.
Mm-hmm.
Surely, whether it takes 24 hours or 48 hours or whatever, just as with alcohol or anything else, it takes time, relatively short time, for this thing to dissipate. The problem is we don't seem to have. Now, I told them, now I'm the chairman, so I said, listen, we have to change this law. We can't debar the kind of people that we want to take into hype. We can't debar people who are not smoking, because I saw half of them smoking. So we cannot continue with this. The problem is there doesn't seem to be a test that could test the sort of effect at a particular point. So in other words, I stopped smoking for a month. There's no effect, but there's no test to do that. All they do is a test to see if you have marijuana in your system, and you have marijuana in your system.
Yes.
They also do tests for alcohol, but apparently alcohol dissipates after a relatively short time.
Yes.
So there must be, now in my case, in our case, I told them we cannot debar these guys. So a lot of guys who are debarred, I said, no, bring them back. And I tell them, I said, listen to me. We go do some kind of breathalyzer test on you, we go check your eyes or whatever. But I've given you a chance. And so that is an issue. You smoke 3 weeks ago and you still have the thing in you, but you're not impaired at the moment. How? No, that's a medical question. You can answer that. But that's something you have to look at in your research.
Yes, it is a consideration. Thank you.
Okay, man. And thanks for your for what you have been doing is a very important, because what I told them I see, so I won't be much longer. What I told them I say it is legal to smoke, or rather it is not illegal to smoke.
It's not
So
illegal.
how you could tell somebody it is not illegal to do something and debar them from a particular exercise?
Yes.
Now this fella has to learn the different trades. He was doing plumbing and whatever, and so on. So at some point, one would maybe have to say, well, it will affect his performance. But the first part of the course is sort of theory for the first month or whatever. But you get my point.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yes.
I'm
Thank you.
sorry for taking so long.
That's
No,
okay,
no,
Professor.
that's okay, Professor. Thank
And
you for
that-
that contribution.
And that young man may have actually been at the level of addiction. And that is a hard habit to break. And of course, cannabis THC stays in your fatty tissue for a while, for quite some time.
Yes, that's what the doctor told me.
Yeah.
I checked out a doctor who knows about those things. One of those kind of men specializing in them things.
Great.
Thank you, Prof, for that contribution. Anyone else? Oh, I have a comment. Let me get to that. From Adeline Mohan Ragbir, great presentation. Please comment on how your policy would consider workplaces that do not conduct routine or random drug testing. Example, teachers who have one medical which is scheduled, so one can prepare for that test to pass. Therefore, a teacher can be an undetected user without being known.
Yes. Very interesting point. Yes, we see the study is focused on tertiary education, and I suspect that other arms of education can benefit from the study. We do, for UTT, for example, we do a pre-employment medical, and part of that includes drug and alcohol testing. The study is intended on promoting policy or providing best practice. So at the end of it, I should be able to say, listen, this is what may work for all institutions or for certain institutions in different sectors and so forth. Be it that teaching is not considered to be a safety sensitive position. My wish is that we develop a policy or provide a policy where tertiary level organizations, teaching organizations can say, listen, we encourage you to listen to us. These are our policies where cannabis is concerned. If you are a user, if by that time you are in fact a medically prescribed user, well, these are the parameters in which we allow you to perform your duties. Please be reminded of Section 5C in the legislation. Please, because as a professional, you are required to conduct yourself in a particular manner. That's part of the law. Please be reminded of the OSH Act, which also prescribes that you not present a danger to yourself and others in the workplace. That is what I believe we should be doing for this sector, actually, providing policy, clearly articulating it, and providing the opportunity for persons to get help if they need help for an addiction problem.
Thank you for that response there, Al. I don't have any raised hands, or I don't know if anyone wishes to ask any other question. You could just unmute and join in, or if Dr. Pasali has any further questions that she wishes to contribute before we close off.
No, thank you. I'm okay
Great.
for now.
Great.
Okay, everyone.
Professor, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jenny. As we reach to this point, before we conclude the seminar, I would like to invite all of you to rejoin us today as well. We have a second seminar on 2:30. So please rejoin us for the seminar by Mr. Afraz Muhammad. I'd like to thank you all for joining us on this seminar. Good luck, Mr. Al. And on behalf of the reps office, I would like to wish you the success on your second seminar. Please be reminded of the submission of the research ethics applications, please, before you go to the second seminar.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone, and see you again on the second seminar on 2:30. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.